Hey guys, it's Pam. Thanks so much for coming back. In this video, I am working on my December Daily 2019 album in the hashtag Done by December challenge for Ali Edwards Designing and the creative team there. One of the things that, well, first of all, I want to say that it was a little bit of a challenge to figure out how I wanted to document this particular time frame in my December Daily album, mainly because my family and I spent this time on vacation at Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida. It was a fantastic trip, and I have already very thoroughly documented that vacation in 2 full 6x8 albums. If that's something that you want to see more of, I would totally encourage you to check out the start to finish travel class over on Ali Edwards' website. I was a contributor there, and you can see my entire album and start to finish process in that class. So having already completed those 2 very full 6x8 albums, I do not want to recreate all of that in my December Daily project here. So what I had originally thought was that I would try to make just basically a single spread to cover these days from December 2nd to December 7th. And my intention had been to kind of play with the idea of an advent calendar, where there would be these tabs across the 2-page spread, and each day you could flip up to see kind of what the highlight was for that day, telling just one small story per day. Well, I went to Pinterest to try to figure out to find some design inspiration for how I might want my advent calendar to look, and stumbled into a entirely different world of basically pop-ups. Let me see if I can find them here. So I started browsing around Pinterest and found all of these really super fun pop-up ideas. Here was one that was like an advent calendar with tabs, but the one that I couldn't stop thinking about was this idea here, where you basically take some paper, and in this case they've just used markers and created tabs that open, elements that pop up, but each of these pages is almost creating its own scene. And I thought, wouldn't it be really cool if I could figure out a way to turn each of those photos into a scene, almost as though it's a diorama. Here's another version, and just in terms of planning for this coming year, I am starting to think that this would be a really cool strategy to do a story of kind of around the house for December, that type of story. So what I ended up doing then was, first of all, I wanted to see how this works. How do I turn these papers into pop-up or flip-out pages? So this is just a plain sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper. I followed the instructions to do the folds and a simple cut to be able to create this page. And then the idea there is that you would make multiples of these pages and stick them back to back so that each page flip open and it's almost like a new pop-up scene. So that was the starting point, and then I thought, well, how do I get my pictures to work on there to create a scene? So here is how that works. This is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of matte photo paper. I have printed my photo onto it to take up the entire page in the full size. And then with a series of folds and one simple cut, you then flip this around to create this scene from our vacation at the swimming pool, and then it simply folds back up and folds away so that it's very flat and can fit inside this type of album or this type of project very easily. So that was step 1. Okay, so in this video, I am going to go ahead and create a mini album with a series of these scenes from our vacation to be able to include inside my December Daily 2019 album. I'm also going to be using some strategies to make this more like a pop-up book, and I also want to be able to figure out how I'm going to fit the journaling in, because there's still words that are included as part of the story for each day. So that's what I'm going to be working on in this video. I have learned quite a bit as I have been working on this about some of the things that are helpful. And of course, I want to share that with you. That's kind of the point of even having these on YouTube, right? To be able to share what I've learned. So first thing I want to say is that I print most of my photos from home. I've done this for like since the beginning of scrapbooking, basically, for me, since I started scrapbooking back in 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. And when I am printing my digital elements, especially things like journaling cards, my go-to brand of paper for printing those things is a matte photo paper, and I have always been using, well, my favorite one to use is just this Staples brand of matte photo paper. And the reason for that is that when you print on it, it is bright white on both sides, so you can print double-sided if you need to. But the main thing is about the thickness of the paper. So this stuff is pretty rigid and pretty sturdy, and you know that because it tells you kind of the weight of the paper on each of these packages. So this Staples brand of matte photo paper, which is my go-to, is 61 pounds. That's the rating for it. This works great for most of my photo printing needs for like journaling cards and that type of thing. And then when I print photos, most of the time, if they're just going into pockets or going onto like a scrapbook layout, I usually go with a glossy version of photo paper. So having said that, I wanted to talk about this because the thickness of the paper is going to be one of the things that will make a difference in this particular mini book project, because this 61-pound weight paper is actually just a little bit too thick to be able to get these nice crisp folds. So I needed to look at some other options. So I took a look to see what else was available out there. And I have a Canon photo printer, so I looked at the Canon matte photo paper. And just for comparison's sake, the weight of this paper is definitely a bit lighter. It's rated at 45 pounds. And then I also looked at the Epson presentation paper in matte, because I've heard good things about this one. And the weight rating on this one is 27 pounds, so it's a little bit lighter. So if we're talking like from the thinnest to the thickest photo paper, this one goes from 27 pounds to 45 pounds to 61 pounds. So that's kind of the difference that we're working with there. So ultimately, when I wanted to print my background scenes, these guys here, I went with the medium weight one of the 45-pound ranking so that I could get those nice crisp folds, and the print quality on the images is very good. So that's the first thing that I want to share. I'll show you, I did a test run. This is with the presentation paper, which is clearly much lighter and a little bit flimsy for the purposes of being the background page. So even though the print quality was still good and the colors look great, the thickness of it, I don't trust to hold up to what I need it to do for the purposes of this little mini book project. Okay, so I'm mainly going to be using the matte photo paper by Canon for my backgrounds. But then, okay, so this is a good example here. So this was one of my early prototypes here. And I want to have these background scenes, but I want to be able to pop out some of the contents of it and the people and what we're doing here. So this was an early run where I've got this picture of my daughter, and I want her, who's talking to the driver and the talking head of the night bus, to be able to stand out on her own. Most of the elements that I wanted to pop out are fairly tall and fairly thin, and so they needed to be printed on a heavier weight of paper. So for that purpose, I went with all the fussy cutting, and all the extra elements that you're going to see here are printed on this heavier weight photo paper.
One of the first steps in creating our scenes here is to choose the photos that you're going to use for the backgrounds. And the ones that will be easiest to use are usually the ones that are vertically oriented and that have a kind of a horizon line in them about 2/3 of the way down from the top of the photo. So I have a couple of photos selected here in my project bin at the bottom of my workspace. I am working in Photoshop Elements 2020, and we're going to play around with a few of these so I can show you some of the strategies that I use to create my background scenes. So we're going to start off by getting a new canvas ready to work with. We're choosing a blank file that's going to be 8.5 inches wide by 11 inches high. Resolution of 300 pixels per inch is what you want to work with for the best printing quality. And I'm just going to drag and drop this first photo here onto that canvas. I'm going to stretch out the corners just a little bit to resize it so that it fits in the space. And I'm going to turn it just a little bit as well, because you can see that the original version was just a little bit off kilter or not quite level there. So that is the photo dropped onto the background canvas. Now the thing that's going to be really helpful here is to figure out where the fold lines are going to be, and we can visualize that on our screen before we really get printing here by using the guides to help us. So we're going to split the page in half vertically at the 4.25 inch mark, and then we need to split it again horizontally about 2/3 of the way down the page. So the bottom section is going to be 4.25 inches. That means that the top needs to be 6.75 inches. And you can see there then that when we try to print this page and make the folds with these guides in place here, that we are folding just kind of at a little bit of an awkward spot there across the photo. So I'm going to reposition this just a little bit more so that it's folding in a spot that seems more in line there. And then the other thing I'm going to do is now I have this white space at the bottom and I want to be able to fill that in, but I want it to look like it still matches with the photo. So I'm going to cheat just a little bit here. We're going to make this so that we can see the layers panel, which aren't currently visible. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to select that layer. I'm going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to pick the bottom layer of the two. And I'm using the arrows on my keyboard to shift it down a little bit. And then I can resize the bottom layer so that the grid lines that are in that cool cobblestone path still match up. So I'm going to make it bigger so that it looks like it still fits properly with what you would expect to see next in the photo. And this is just going to be a little bit of trial and error, a little bit of wiggling things around there, and that looks relatively decent. The last thing I can do to try to touch up this appearance just a little bit is to merge these two layers together so that they are just one layer. And then I'm going to grab my spot healing tool on the tools panel on the left hand side there. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger so that it has a nice big brush to work with. And I'm going to brush over where that seam was, and that kind of makes it look like it's more natural. It's a little bit harder to tell that this was originally two photos blended together here. So that's one example of creating the background scene. Now, if you have a photo that you want to use that is not vertically oriented, not to worry. I've got an example here of a horizontal one that I used from the swimming pool, and I'll show you how I worked with that one. So in this example, this is the photo that I want to use as my background scene, and I've got a new canvas all set to go here. Again, I'm just going to drag and drop that onto the space, and I am just literally going to resize this by dragging the corners out. You want to make sure you're using those corner handlebars if you're resizing so that your image doesn't get distorted. Slide it over there just a bit. And then again, I want to take a look and see what this is going to look like when it's all folded up, because once we fold it, we're going to be losing an entire bottom quadrant of the photo. So we want to see, first of all, the vertical split, so where it's splitting in half down the middle. And then I want to get a better look too at the horizontal split to see where that's going to cut off. There we go. That looks pretty reasonable. So I will, when we make our folds and when we make our cuts, which you'll see coming up in a little bit, I'm going to lose either this bottom left corner here or this bottom right corner here, depending on which one I want to keep. Because this has got the beach ball floating in it, I'm probably going to keep this quadrant over here, and this one will be tucked up behind the back of this image here. So these first two images that I've shown here work really well as backgrounds, but they don't really have a whole lot else going on in them. There are definitely other pictures that I've got here, such as this one, where I want to actually remove my daughter from this initial image so that I can then cut her out separately, and then she'll be an element that pops out of the page. So let's take a look at how we do that now. Here's a new canvas over here, 8.5 by 11, and I'm going to do the same thing where I'm just going to drag and drop that image right up onto the canvas. I'm going to stretch it out so that it fills in the entire space there. And then I'm going to use the guides to take a look at how things are going to fold in the end here. So first of all, we need a vertical split, and then we'll look at where the horizontal fold will fall. Okay, so if we fold it exactly like it is and don't do anything else to this, we are going to cut off the driver at the knees, and that's just not going to look right. So we're going to move this image up so that he sits above that horizontal fold. The other thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and remove Emily from this image. So to do this, right now I'm working in the expert mode, but I'm going to switch over to the guided mode for Photoshop Elements. There's an option here to remove an object, which is exactly what we want to do. I'm going to grab the brush tool, and I'm basically going to cover over all of the area here that I want removed from this picture. And in this case, it's going to be my daughter for the moment. We're going to take her out of this so that we can get a background that functions properly as a background. So I'm just highlighting over the entire size of her here. I've chosen to use the brush tool because I kind of want to have a little bit more control over exactly where the borders are of her image, but there's certainly some other tools that you can play with there on the right hand side. You can see there's like an automatic selection tool, there's a lasso tool. I'm just going to go ahead and use the brush tool for now. I haven't played around with this a whole lot at this point. This is probably one of my first go-arounds with the object removal. Okay, so I've highlighted her entire image, and I want to click Remove Object, and there you go. So when you look at this picture now, you can see that it looks maybe a little bit wonky, like you can't see her at all, but obviously the image has been distorted just a little bit. Because this is going to be my background scene, and when I complete the pop-out portion, this does not concern me. It is okay for it to be completely imperfect because ultimately this area is going to be covered up by one of my die cut pieces that will pop out from the finished page. It'll be easier to see that as we get into it. So for now, I'm going to leave it right there. You do have the option of using a spot healing brush, which is over here on the right hand side as well. So I might try to use that. You can increase the brush size just a little bit to however large you need it to be, because it does look a little weird having some of this purple in here from the night bus. So if I kind of highlight that area, it just cleans it up a little bit to say that, that doesn't look very natural. I'm also taking out some of the extra yellow there that it had picked up around the asphalt and the parking lines of the curb there. So like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're welcome to spend some time playing around with it if that's what you want to do. But at this point, this is completely good enough for what my next step is going to be. So I'm going to click the bottom arrow there and say next. Now I want to continue editing this image in the expert mode. So that's there. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer just like I did before, where I need to extend the background to fill in some of this white space here. And I'm going to grab the layer that's sitting just underneath it. Unfortunately, in this case, it looks like it's not working quite right. So I might need to do a little bit of playing around here. Let's get rid of that duplicated layer for now. I think what I'm going to do is create a shape. It doesn't matter what color. I'm just going to create a big rectangle that covers that whole spot there. That way I can take this layer again. I'm going to go back and duplicate the edited layer again. I'm going to drop it over top of that shape and move it down so that I can crop it or mask it inside that rectangle that I just had there. Okay, this is a little bit tricky to explain, but basically what I've done here is this is the original layer where I removed my daughter from. I needed to fill in the white space that was at the bottom. So I created a large shape with the rectangle tool that covers that area. I then duplicated the edited area, and I have moved the duplicated layer over top of that shape. So what I'm going to do now is mask it into that rectangle shape. So I'm hovering my mouse on this line that splits the two areas there. I'm holding down the Alt key on my PC, and you can see that it makes this down pointing arrow appear when you hover it over those two lines there with the Alt key held down. Then I'm going to click my mouse, and it's going to mask that shape, mask that image into the shape. Okay, so what I have now is the edited image where Emily's removed. I've duplicated the layer and filled in that little gap that was open there at the bottom. I can now merge these layers together and then grab that spot healing brush again just to brush over the seam where those two pictures originally met. And it just kind of makes it look a little bit more natural, where you can't really tell where the image was that had been removed previously. So I hope that makes sense. Please feel free to ask me some questions in the message, the comments below if you need more of a thorough rundown about how that worked. Let's use one more example here that I think will be a little bit simpler to explain. So I'm going to do one more new canvas, and anytime you're using water, it makes that remove object technique work a lot more easily. So I've got a new canvas there. It is 8.5 by 11. I've dragged and dropped my photo onto there. I am going to figure out where my folds are going to land with some guides. We'll do this. Okay, so that looks pretty reasonable, but I think in this case that maybe I want to make it just a little bigger. Okay, so that one worked out nice and easily. I'll just slide that over. That's an easy way to remove the hand that was sticking out there. Okay, we're going to go into the guided image option again. We're going to remove an object. I'm going to grab my brush, and I'm going to remove Emily from this part here for the moment. And then I also want to remove this dude over here because he doesn't really need to be in my picture. He's a little bit distracting in this case. So I'm going to brush him out as well. Okay, so I think that's all that I want to remove from this image right now. So I'll go ahead and click that button to remove those objects, and they are gone. It did pick up some of this border over here when it was trying to figure out what it should be replacing it with. So again, I'm going to just use the spot healing brush. I'm going to make the size a little bit bigger so I can really capture a good amount of the area that I want to fix up here. And I'm just brushing right over that concrete that looks awkward in the middle of the wave pool or the lazy river, and it's gone. So that one worked out really well. Click next. We're going to go back and look at this picture again in the expert mode, and that is a great background to work with. It's going to fold up in some good areas. I'll probably lose this bottom quadrant here when I fold it all together so that the focus will really be on the water of the lazy river, and ready to go ahead and print some of these guys.
So I have done a fair bit of work and printed off a lot of the photos already that I'm going to be using for all of my different scenes. The hardest part was narrowing it down because they turned out really great, like much better than I had been expecting that they would. So the hard part was really just trying to figure out how to cut back my selection a little bit and choose just the very best ones to tell my story. But what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to create the background scene. So you've got your full page photo printed on 8.5 by 11 matte photo paper. I have a scoring board and a bone folder here. These are going to be really helpful to measure out where I need the folds to be and to get the cuts done properly. So on my 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, I want to select the middle point, so that's going to be 4.25 inches, and do a line all the way down with the bone folder here. So that is going to be the first step. One line all the way down. Next, I need to repeat another measure of this at 4.25 inches, and it's going to go horizontally across the photo. So here we go, number 2. And I'm just scoring it to be able to fold the pages with a nice crispness to them. I don't know if you can tell on the back there, but you can see that it's created a good score in the page. And then the last thing that I need to do is create a diagonal on one of these two bottom corner pieces. So you can decide at this point if you're going to use the right or the left. It doesn't matter, probably whichever one makes the most sense in your image overall, because you're going to lose either this whole bottom quadrant when you do the folds or this whole bottom quadrant. So pick which one looks the best to you. The one that you want to use is the one that we're going to be doing like a 45-degree angle score onto. So my scoring board has got this extra little piece for doing these ones on the angle. And I'm just going to line it up so that the point there is engaged into one of the grooves, and score right down to where the two lines meet, right down the middle. Okay, I don't know if you can see that on the back now, but you can see I've got a vertical score, a horizontal score, and then a 45-degree angle on the bottom quadrant that's going to be folded. So what we're going to do next is cut the piece that's going to ultimately just to the intersection. This is of the non-scored bottom quadrant. And then we're going to do the folds against the points that have been scored, pressing down firmly in all directions. You can go ahead and reinforce these folds with your bone folder if you want to. So they're nice and crisp. And on the angled quadrant, we're going to fold that up and in. So it'll fit like that. Okay, so we've got our folds in place. And what's going to happen now is we're going to take the quadrant that's going to go missing, tuck it up behind the long portion on the right side there in this case. I'm going to use a little bit of rolling adhesive to get it to stick into place. All the way around so that there's no gaps there. And press it down firmly. Okay, there we go. So that's going to be my scene, and this is now ready to add some details. I'm going to repeat that one more time on another scene so that you can follow along. The next step in building my scenes here is trying to figure out how to pop out some of the extra elements on my pages. So figuring out how to make my people pop out to be a part of this scene. I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. I first tried kind of like the old school, I don't know if you remember in elementary school learning how to make a pop-out book where you would just cut slits into the back and then fold out struts for your scene and adhere your pieces to them. That would work in some cases. I have a good example of one where that did work well here. So here's a good scene where that worked okay because I created just an elongated strut in the back there so that I could adhere my little cutout onto the front of that, and it creates a fun part of the scene. But in the cases especially where the elements are tall and skinny, that didn't work very well because even with my heavyweight photo paper, the pieces would flop over or fall down. So then I tried creating extra struts that would fold up within the page, and that worked out okay. It was tricky to get the pieces just in exactly the right location for some of the elements, but it didn't work for all of them because there were other instances where I tried that. This is a good example of one where it looks great when it's popped out there, but without the upper piece, his head would end up sticking way outside of the page. And then the other problem here is that when I did add the upper strut, I couldn't get it to fold properly. You can see that it's being distorted, like the paper figure there is getting curved and bent and it's not really working properly. So my workaround for this was to create scenes where they don't necessarily pop out on their own automatically, but you can still get this really cool visual effect where just a piece of it is adhered and it can fold in and out of the scene as the pages get folded back together again. This is a good example here of I just left almost like a little tab on the edge of my die cut piece or fussy cut piece and created a fold, used a bit of rolling adhesive to attach that to the scene there so that when the page is completely open, I can pull him out and you can totally see him interacting with the scene behind there. He's got his magic wand, he's casting spells, all the lights are coming on in the scene in the background there. But then just as easily you can tuck it away and fold it back up again, and it is flat and all the pieces are contained where they need to be contained. So this is ultimately the strategy that I went with for a lot of my scenes. And if you'd like to continue watching, I will show you, I'm gonna work on putting two of these scenes together now. One of the things that you're going to need to take into consideration when you are printing the elements that are going to fit into your scene is the scale of them. In some cases, you're going to need to enlarge your people depending on if they are close to the front of the screen or scene, or if they're set further back in the scene. You'll have to kind of gauge what the right perspective is based on the particular element that you're adding and where you want it to be added. So for some, you're going to need to make the people a bit bigger. For some, you're going to need to make the elements a little bit smaller depending on what they are. I'm going to show you what I did in Photoshop Elements. A lot of this is trial and error, but I'll show you what I did to kind of help me gauge that when I wanted to print out my pieces there.
So here's that image again with Emily and the night bus, and what I need to do is figure out how big Emily should be as the fussy cut or die cut piece to add on to my pop-out scene. So what I'm going to do this time around is create a new canvas again, but this time because I want to be able to include probably several images on one page as I add other elements of the die cut pieces into there too. I'm just going to make it horizontally or landscape oriented. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the guides because I know that the height of my folded pieces is going to be 6.75 inches high, and that just lets me know or gives me an easy visual of how much space or how much height I have to work with. Because when we look, let's go back to this picture again for a second. this is the page that was printed, and when we fold this up, I'm going to be losing all of this asphalt down here from the photo. And it doesn't even matter the right or left side piece, it's just that the height of the upper portion of this scene is 6.75 inches high. So I want to make sure that my printed element doesn't extend beyond that height of the picture. So I've got this new page over here. I can see this is how high 6.75 inches is. And if I want her to be in scale with the driver here, he certainly doesn't extend all the way up to the top either. I mean, based on the perspective, the fact that she's going to be closer to the viewer, she can be a little bit bigger than him, but we don't want it to look completely out of whack. So I'm going to go back to my new canvas. I am going to actually, I'm just going to figure out which layer it is that I want to drag and drop here first. So this is the one that I want. So if I go back to my new canvas and I drag and drop that picture that has Emily in it, I'm going to make her just a little bit bigger. And because I really just need her, I'm going to do that masking technique again, where I'm going to grab a rectangle, I'm going to create a shape, and then I'm going to mask that layer inside the shape so that I can focus just on her, and that'll be the area that I fussy cut around. I can then move this around a little bit on my page to save space and to add other elements there. Here is another example. So this is one of the scenes that I have created and I'm going to be working with. And in this case, I want to get my husband and my daughter casting their magic spells so that I can add them to a scene. So again, I'm going to get to my fussy cut page or my fussy cut worksheet. I'm going to drag and drop that whole layer up onto the picture, or onto the canvas rather. I'm going to shrink them down just a little bit in this case because, again, I want to make sure that they are proportionate in that kind of 6.75 inch limitation. Probably just a little bit smaller. And same thing, I'm just going to create a masked area. So I'll grab my rectangle shape tool, I'm going to cover over the space that's required for it, shuffle the order of my layers, and then mask that image into the rectangle shape. And once I have my page filled, I will send this through to my printer and use my scissors just to cut around the images, fussy cut around the images so that I can add them to my scenes.
So once I've got them printed, I am ready to just use some scissors. I'm going to fussy cut around the shape so that I can add her to my scene. In this case, she is going to be visiting the night bus. I am going to do a technique just like I did over here with Liam, and when I cut around her, I'm going to leave a little bit of space here that I will be able to attach to the wall on the back of this scene so that I have a point that I can adhere her and then fold her out to create a more interactive element there. Okay, so I have my figure cut out here, and I want her to sit back kind of around here probably to get the right perspective of the size of her compared to the size of the driver, and like he's a full-grown man back there versus this little girl over here. So I have intentionally left a little bit of a tab on here, and I want it to try to blend in with the photo as best as possible. So I think I'm actually going to trim it down even just a little bit further, so that I can pop her safely back here without obscuring too much of the the photo that I want to keep behind it. So I've got, one of the things I need to take into consideration is her feet, so that they will not get stuck when I am trying to fold the pieces back up here. I think this is going to work right about here. So I'll probably even just trim off a tiny bit more of this spot so that it's not running into the curb. This is not going to be a case of everything is visually perfect. For sure there's going to be flaws when you look at the pieces or the specific elements of the picture, but my goal here isn't for perfect, it's just to get a fun effect, a fun playful effect in creating these scenes. So I think that she's going to probably be positioned right around here, and I've kind of been folding the elements up, or folding her little die cut figure up just a little bit so that I can see where I want it to go and how far out I want it to go to get the right angle of having that conversation there. I could have potentially left on even a longer piece of the die cut there so that she would be standing out further, which is something I might still consider. It'd be really easy just to reprint it, but for the sake of right now, I'm just going to go ahead and make it happen. So this is kind of where I've been practicing the fold as I put her into this scene here. And I'm just going to use a little bit of rolling adhesive here on this tab that I've folded over or created so that I can stick her right into the scene. I think that she'll end up somewhere around here. Looks good to me. Okay, so Emily is now in this scene with the driver, and like I said, this is just going to be kind of a lot of trial and error on your part to make it work with your photos and whatever project you're working on there. And you'll want to make sure that there's clearance so that the pieces, if possible, in some spots don't get crushed underneath the fold there when you pull everything back together. I think that'll work right about there. So I should be able to now tuck her in, fold back up, and then reopen. And there she is, talking to the driver. So I have some more work to do on putting these scenes together, and that's what I'm going to work on next. But one of the things I wanted to mention was that this kind of gives you the opportunity to really be creative. One of the stories that I wanted to tell was about the Hogwarts Express, the train there, and then the 9 3/4 story, because my son was going to be turning 9 3/4 just a couple of days after we got home from our trip. So when we realized that while we were there, it kind of made everything more special. These were actually originally 2 separate photos. If I open this up, you can see that Liam was actually nowhere originally in this photo of the Hogwarts Express. But because these stories fit so well together, I took 2 separate photos, so the one of him under the 9 3/4 sign and then the one of the train behind him, and put them together so that I could tell this story in kind of a fun and creative way. One of the other things I wanted to mention about this one in particular is that I did a slightly different approach here in creating this little scene by actually taking the entire photo and wrapping the edge, the outside border there, along the outside of the scene so that I can actually fold this open entirely. And it just has a really fun overall effect. I like how this one turned out especially. So that's one example of that. And then I have another example of that same kind of technique over, where is it? This one. This is another example where when I fussy cut my figures, this is my husband and my daughter doing some magic over in Diagon Alley, I left the edge there that I could fold it over entirely and have them pop out to create this scene of them doing magic. And I think that it has just a really cool effect instead of having all of the people necessarily taped right inside the scene. So that's something to keep in mind. Just a couple more ideas of how to make these pop-out pieces work for you with your photos. Okay, it's taken me a couple of days, but I am back at my table again trying to work on this little vacation mini album to go inside my December Daily 2019 album. I have all of my scenes pretty much prepped, and the next step is going to be to assemble these back to back and put them together to create the mini book. The other thing that I've done is I've prepared these, the journaling, onto just some 4x6 matte photo paper. I've typed it on there. I used a digital stamp for each of these numbers. So my plan is, as I'm adhering these pages back to back, I'm going to tuck the journaling in between them. I've got a circle punch that I'm going to use to kind of create a groove there so that just the number peeks out, and it kind of would serve as a prompt then to pull out the journaling to be able to see more of the story. So that is what I'm going to be working on now.
I am creating these or assembling these pages in two different steps. So the first step is to create the pockets that are going to hold the journaling. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the pages that are going to go back to back, so the pages for December 2nd, and I am using some double-sided tape to go ahead and create lining on just the three edges. So top, left side, and bottom are going to be covered with that double-sided tape. The tape that I'm using is about a 1/4 inch wide. It is some tape that I had in my stash from scrapbook.com, and I decided to go with a double-sided tape instead of the rolling adhesive that I use so often for this scenario because it gives kind of like a cleaner edge, so I'm not going to run the risk of having a little bit of the goop from the rolling adhesive blending in or I guess kind of coming out of the seams or coming out of the edges or making it difficult for my journaling card to slide in and out of that pocket. So this was very helpful to go ahead and seal up just the three sides to create a pocket that will hold my journaling. And then the other thing that I'm doing there is once I have those two pages adhered back to back, I'm moving on to the next two pages before I assemble the whole thing together. With the two pages in place there, I am using my circle punch to create, first of all, I am trying to mark out where that circle needs to go. So I'm tucking the journaling card in and then just using a pen to mark the top and bottom sections of the numbers so that I kind of narrow down exactly where that circle should fall. And then I'm just using my punch and looking at where the lines are and kind of centering them within the circle. I will say that I broke 2 circle punches doing this. The first few pages were fine, but when I got down lower on the page where there was basically 4 layers of this photo paper back to back to back, it was a little bit too much for the punches to get through, and so I busted a couple of circle punches in this process and had to go in with scissors to try to clean up some of the edges as best as I could. A little bit sloppy. I would probably revise my strategy just a little bit the next go around, or maybe see if I can find some stronger punches. But I did intentionally stick those pages together before I used the circle punch so that I wouldn't have to worry about lining up the semicircles there quite so much. And then as I was adding a few more elements to some of the scenes in these pages here, I was using the double-sided tape a lot more than the rolling adhesive too. I found that just in general, it created a more secure bond there and was a little bit less messy to work with, so that was very helpful. Once I had all of the pockets put together, the next step then was to assemble the remaining pages so that they form a book. So again, I'm using my double-sided adhesive here, and then I'm actually using the rolling adhesive as well because I want to cover as much of this surface area as possible to make sure that these pages are really stuck together. I don't need a pocket or anything in this case, so tape all around the outside edges, and then again more rolling adhesive in the middle just to make sure that everything is nice and tight and secure there, and then just doing the best I can to eyeball where the pages line up along the edges. There isn't as much room to trim these pages down afterwards because of the way that they are assembled, so just eyeballing it, doing the best you can, and going from there.
Okay, I am back at my work table. It's been a couple of days since I've been here, but happy to be back and working on my project again. What I've got so far is this is going to be kind of the background for my days 2 to 7 in my album. I have my mini book here with our travel stories for that time frame. And I've been thinking a little bit about how I want to cover this or what I want to use for the cover. Also, originally, when I had been kind of planning this, my thought was to make this have a pocket on it to be able to hold my mini book, but I can see now that my mini book is quite a bit larger than I had originally anticipated, so I've got to come up with another strategy for that. So I've been thinking about what I want to do for the cover, and I'm really excited about what I've come up with. That's what I'm going to be working on today. I have this traveler's notebook cover from my stash. It's this beautiful gray with an elastic closure, and you can see that there's like a grommet holding the elastic there so that it just wraps around. And I have decided that I want to try to do something like this to cover my mini book. So that's what I'm working on today. I have some felt that I picked up from Michael's last week, and then I've got just like a piece of craft colored cardstock. The color doesn't really matter at all, but because this is a fairly thin and flimsy version of felt, I'm thinking I probably need to line it or back it with something, so I'm going to probably try the cardstock. I also have some tacky glue spray that I'm going to use to try to stick these two pieces together. This has been in my cupboard for a long time. I'm hoping it's going to work. That's my plan there. I've got some of these little, the brads, the grommet pieces that I will use to try to make a spot for the elastic closure. I also picked this up from Michael's as well. It's some elastic cord. It's a little bit thinner than what I had hoped to be able to use, but it's all that they had in stock at the moment. I think they're still really short on supplies just in general with people making face masks and that kind of thing right now. The other thing that I have, this is something that I had picked up on our trip last year. It's a patch, and I'm going to use this on the cover, and I think it's going to be so great. I'm really excited about this. This is a patch from our trip at Universal Studios. It's supposed to be like an iron-on version. I'm not sure if I'm going to try to iron it, because I know with high heats sometimes that doesn't go well with the plastics and stuff that are in felt. I might just use some more of the spray, possibly. We'll stick that on the front. There'll be the elastic closure. All right, so that's my plan. I'm gonna get to work here. So what I wanna do is start with the cardstock and just kind of wrap it around. It doesn't need to have a well-defined spine. Like even on this original version of the Traveler's Notebook, it wraps around. It doesn't have like a crisp edge or anything like that to it. So I'm gonna start with getting the size right on the cardstock, trim this down to the right size, and then stick it onto the felt so that I can cut the right size and shape from the felt too. Just using my scissors to cut notches for where I think those measurements should ideally be. And then I'm going to use my paper trimmer to make the cuts official.
The last step in assembling this awesome little mini book is to get the cover stuck onto the contents of the book. So again, I'm using my double-sided tape. It's a 1/4 inch wide, and just using it on the outside border of the pages or the back of the book there and sticking it down to the cardstock that is the inside cover.
Okay, so my mini album is officially done, and I am just so excited with how this turned out. I think at the end of the video I will get some pictures on there for you to show you kind of the end result of how everything looks all together, but it's pretty great. I am really in love with how this worked out. The last thing that I need to do to get this officially into my album is figure out how to get it inside. I mean, you can see that the top end doesn't look so bulky, but the bottom end is pretty thick because of all of the folding pieces of paper that went into there. So my plan, this is what I'm going to do. This is one of the pockets that was included in the 2019 December Daily release as an add-on option. And so I think what I'm going to do is, because I tried this out a little bit earlier, because even sticking this inside here, it still takes up quite a bit of space. Like, it's still quite thick, but it does close. So because this part of the pocket already has ridges in it and it's able to accommodate kind of a wider area, what I'm going to do is flip this over, turn it upside down and flip it over. So this is going to be the front, and then this will be obviously the back, but the ridges here will help accommodate the extra thickness of the bottom. And then I am going to cut off the top part here, probably just above this hole, so that that hole can still provide some support. Probably cut it right around here, maybe even do like a little scalloped circle punch in there so that this can easily be taken in and out. And then on the flip side, the closure will just be like a nice decorative effect. So that's my plan.